0. Title: This baby was destined for Bear family, the prophecy that came true. The snow fell differently that night. Lily Morgan stood at her cabin window, watching the flakes drift down in perfect silence, each one catching the moonlight like tiny crystals suspended in time. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, feeling the chill seep through her skin, and noticed something strange about the way the snow moved. It wasn't falling straight down as it usually did during winter storms. Instead, it seemed to spiral gently, creating patterns in the air that reminded her of ancient symbols she couldn't quite understand. The forest beyond her porch stood completely still, not a single branch swaying, not a single sound breaking through the peculiar quiet that had settled over everything. She had lived in this remote cabin for 3 years now, ever since she needed to escape the noise of the city after losing her husband, but she had never experienced anything quite like this. The usual sounds of the wilderness, the distant howl of wolves, the rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, the creaking of old trees. All of it had vanished, replaced by a silence so complete it made her ears ring. She turned away from the window to make herself some tea, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that something was about to change. The kettle on the stove began to whistle, but even that familiar sound seemed muted somehow, as if the very air around her cabin had become thick with anticipation. As she poured the hot water over the tea leaves, she heard something that made her freeze. It wasn't exactly a sound, more like a vibration that she felt in her bones, a gentle thrum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The cup in her hand trembled slightly, sending ripples across the surface of the tea. She set it down carefully on the counter and walked back to the window, her heart beating faster now, though she couldn't explain why. The snow continued its strange dance outside, and as she watched, she noticed that the patterns it created seemed to be leading somewhere, forming a path that wound from the deep forest directly to her front porch. That's when she saw it. At first, she thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the moonlight playing on the snow-covered ground. But as she looked closer, she realized there was something on her porch, something that hadn't been there just moments before. It was wrapped in what appeared to be fur, real fur, not the synthetic kind you'd find in stores, but the thick, warm pelt of some large animal. Her first instinct was fear. What if it was a trap? Or worse, what if whatever had left it was still nearby, watching her? But something about the way the bundle lay there, so still and peaceful in the swirling snow, made her curiosity stronger than her caution. She grabbed her heavy coat from the hook by the door, wrapped it tightly around herself, and slowly turned the doorknob. The cold hit her immediately, but it wasn't the harsh, biting cold she expected. Instead, it felt almost gentle, like being wrapped in a cool blanket on a summer night. She stepped onto the porch, her boots crunching softly on the fresh snow, and approached the bundle carefully. As she got closer, she noticed that the fur wrapping wasn't just any fur. It was bear fur, thick and brown with hints of gold where the moonlight touched it. Her hands shook as she reached down to pull back a corner of the fur, and what she saw made her gasp so loudly that the sound seemed to echo in the silent night. Inside was a baby, a perfectly healthy, beautiful baby with the rosiest cheeks she had ever seen, and tiny fists curled up against its chest. The child was sleeping peacefully, its breath creating small puffs of vapor in the cold air, completely unbothered by the snow that continued to fall around them. Lily's maternal instincts kicked in immediately, overriding any questions or fears she might have had. She scooped up the baby, fur wrapping and all, and hurried back inside the warm cabin. The moment she crossed the threshold, the baby's eyes opened, the deepest brown she had ever seen, like looking into the heart of the earth itself. But the child didn't cry. Instead, it looked at her with such calm awareness that she felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't the unfocused gaze of a newborn. This baby was looking at her, really looking at her, as if it could see straight into her soul. She carried the bundle to her couch and sat down carefully, adjusting the fur wrapping to make sure the baby was warm. As she did, she noticed something sewn into the inside of the fur, symbols that looked like they had been created with careful, deliberate stitches. They weren't in any language she recognized, but somehow, looking at them made her feel both comforted and deeply curious. The baby made a soft cooing sound, and Lily found herself smiling despite the strangeness of the situation. She had always wanted children, had dreamed of being a mother before life had taken that possibility away from her. And now, here was this child, delivered to her doorstep in the most mysterious way possible. She should have been calling the police, or at least the local ranger station to report an abandoned baby, but something held her back. Maybe it was the way the snow continued to fall in those strange patterns outside her window, or maybe it was the profound sense of rightness she felt holding this child, but she knew, deep in her bones, that this was meant to happen. She stood up, still cradling the baby, and walked to her kitchen to warm some milk. She'd bought it just yesterday for her coffee, never imagining she would be using it to feed an infant. As she heated the milk carefully on the stove, testing it on her wrist the way she had seen mothers do in movies, she became aware of a presence outside. Not a threatening presence, but something watching, waiting. She turned to look out the kitchen window and nearly dropped the bottle she had found in the back of a cupboard, a gift from a friend years ago who had joked that she should be prepared for anything living so far from civilization. There, at the edge of the forest where the trees met her small clearing, stood a bear. But this wasn't just any bear. It was massive, easily the largest bear she had ever seen, with fur that seemed to glow slightly in the moonlight. The bear wasn't moving aggressively, or even particularly interested in approaching. It simply stood there, watching her through the window with eyes that held an intelligence she had never seen in an animal before. The baby, in her arms, made another soft sound, and incredibly the bear's ears perked up at the noise. Lily felt her heart racing, but not from fear. There was something happening here that went beyond normal understanding, something that connected this child, this bear, and somehow her. She walked slowly back to the living room, keeping the baby close to her chest, and sat down where she could still see out the window. The bear had moved closer now, just to the edge of her porch, and had settled down in the snow as if keeping watch. Other animals began to appear from the forest, deer, rabbits, even a few foxes, all of them arranging themselves in a loose circle around her cabin. None of them seemed afraid of each other. Predator and prey sitting side by side in the falling snow, all of their attention focused on the cabin and the child within. Lily fed the baby the warm milk, surprised at how easily the child took to the bottle, drinking with a calm efficiency that seemed unusual for one so young. As the baby fed, she found herself talking softly, telling it about her life, about how she had come to live in this cabin after losing everything she thought mattered in the city. She told the child about her husband, Michael, who had died in a car accident 3 years ago, and how she had retreated to this wilderness to heal her broken heart. She talked about the loneliness that had become her constant companion, and how she had slowly learned to find peace in the solitude of the forest. The baby listened, those deep brown eyes never leaving her face, and she could have sworn she saw understanding there, impossible as that seemed. When the bottle was empty, she lifted the baby to her shoulder to burp it, another half-remembered gesture from watching friends with their children. The baby settled against her neck with a contented sigh, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in her fireplace. Outside, the animals remained in their vigil, and the snow continued its mystical dance. She stood up and walked to the window, showing the baby the scene outside. The child's eyes immediately found the bear, and something passed between them. A recognition, a greeting, something that made Lily's skin prickle with the sense of witnessing something ancient and sacred. She spent the rest of the night holding the baby, walking slowly around her cabin, humming old lullabies her mother had sung to her years ago. The child never cried, never fussed, just watched everything with those knowing eyes. As dawn began to break through the trees, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold, Lily realized that the animals were still there, still watching, still waiting. The bear had not moved from its position by the porch, and if anything, more animals had joined the circle. Birds perched on every available surface, their usual morning song silent, their bright eyes focused on the cabin. It was then that Lily noticed something else about the baby. When the morning light hit the child's skin, there were faint markings visible, like birthmarks, but more deliberate, forming patterns that reminded her of the symbols in the fur wrapping. They seemed to shimmer slightly, appearing and disappearing, depending on how the light struck them. She traced one gently with her finger, and the baby gurgled happily, reaching up to grab her hand with surprising strength. The moment their skin touched, Lily felt a jolt of something. Not electricity, but something warmer, older, like the earth itself was speaking to her through this child. She knew she should be afraid, should be questioning everything about this situation. A mysterious baby, strange markings, wild animals behaving in impossible ways. It all pointed to something far outside the realm of normal experience. But instead of fear, she felt only a deep sense of purpose, as if her entire life had been leading to this moment. She had come to the forest to escape her grief, to hide from a world that had taken everything from her. But perhaps she had really come here to find something, or rather, for something to find her. The baby yawned, showing pink gums and a tiny tongue, and settled more deeply into her arms. The trust in that simple gesture broke something open in Lily's heart, and she felt tears sliding down her cheeks for the first time in months. As if responding to her emotions, the bear outside stood up and took a few steps closer to the cabin. Lily could see its breath misting in the cold morning air, could see the intelligence and concern in its eyes. It was a mother bear, she realized suddenly, though she couldn't say how she knew. The bear had the same watchful, protective energy she had seen in mothers of all species. But why was it here? Why wasn't it hibernating like bears should be at this time of year? And why did it seem so invested in this child she now held? The questions swirled in her mind, but she found she didn't need immediate answers. Sometimes, she thought, the mystery was part of the magic, and rushing to understand everything would only diminish the wonder of what was happening. The baby began to make soft sounds, not quite crying, but clearly communicating something. Lily looked down and saw that the child was gazing intently at the door. She understood without knowing how she understood. The baby wanted to go outside, wanted to be closer to the animals that waited so patiently in the snow. It should have seemed like madness to take an infant out into the cold, surrounded by wild animals, but Lily found herself wrapping the baby more securely in the bear fur and walking to the door. Her hand hesitated on the doorknob for just a moment, the last vestige of her rational mind warning her of danger. But the baby made that soft sound again, and the bear outside made a similar sound in response, and Lily knew that whatever was happening, she was meant to be part of it. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch, the baby held securely against her chest. The cold air was crisp and clean, and the morning sun made the snow sparkle like diamonds. The bear remained where it was, but its eyes were fixed on the baby with an expression that could only be described as tender. Lily took a few more steps forward, down off the porch and into the snow. The circle of animals seemed to lean in slightly, but none of them moved from their positions. She could see now that there were even more than she had first thought: squirrels in the trees, birds of every size and color, even a few wolves standing at the very edge of the forest, their yellow eyes calm and watchful. The baby in her arms began to glow. It was subtle at first, just a soft warmth that Lily thought might be her imagination. But as she watched, the markings on the child's skin became more visible, creating patterns of light that seemed to pulse with the child's heartbeat. The animals responded to this, some of them making soft sounds of recognition or welcome. The bear took another step forward, now close enough that Lily could have reached out and touched it if she had dared. The massive creature lowered its head slightly, a gesture that seemed almost like a bow, and made a rumbling sound deep in its chest that vibrated through the air. Lily felt the baby moving in her arms, tiny hands reaching out toward the bear. Without thinking, acting on pure instinct, she knelt down in the snow, bringing the baby closer to the bear's level. The bear moved forward slowly, carefully, until its massive head was just inches from the baby. Lily's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest, but she didn't pull back. The baby reached out one tiny hand and placed it on the bear's nose, and in that moment, something shifted in the world around them. The snow stopped falling suddenly, as if someone had turned off a switch. The air became perfectly still, and Lily could hear something that sounded like music, though it wasn't quite sound, more like a vibration that she felt in her bones, in her soul. Images flashed through her mind, too quick to fully grasp, but leaving impressions like memories of dreams. She saw forests that stretched beyond the horizon, ancient and untouched. She saw bears walking upright, their eyes glowing with wisdom, gathered in circles like councils. She saw children running through meadows, some human, some something else, all of them connected by threads of light that bound them to the earth and sky. She saw herself, older, grayer, standing in this same spot with the child, no longer a baby but a young boy with those same deep brown eyes, and the bear, also older but still magnificent, standing beside them like family. And through it all she felt a presence, vast and loving, that seemed to be the forest itself, the mountain, the earth, all of it conscious and aware and choosing this moment, this connection, this impossible family. When the vision faded, Lily found herself back in the snow, the baby still touching the bear's nose, both of them surrounded by a faint golden light. The bear pulled back slowly and made a sound that was unmistakably gentle, almost like a purr. Then it turned and walked a few steps toward the forest before looking back at Lily with clear expectation. It wanted her to follow. The baby in her arms made an excited sound, little arms waving toward the trees. Lily stood up, her legs shaky but her resolve firm. She had come to the forest to escape her old life, but perhaps she had really come here to begin a new one that defied everything she thought she knew about the world. She looked back at her cabin, door still open, smoke still rising from the chimney. It would be there when she returned, she knew somehow. This wasn't about leaving her life behind, but about expanding it to include wonders she had never imagined possible. She adjusted the baby in her arms, made sure the fur wrapping was secure, and took a step toward the bear. The massive animal made an approving sound and continued walking, not too fast, always looking back to make sure she was following. The other animals began to move as well, creating a kind of escort around them. The wolves flanked them at a distance. The deer walked alongside. The birds flew overhead in a protective canopy. It was like a parade from a fairy tale, except it was real. Happening to her, Lily Morgan, failed city dweller turned forest hermit, now mother to a mysterious child and apparently friend to all the creatures of the wilderness. They walked deeper into the forest than Lily had ever ventured before. The trees grew older and larger the further they went, their trunks so massive that it would take a dozen people holding hands to circle them. The snow was lighter here, filtered by the canopy above, and the air felt different. Older, richer, full of secrets and stories. The baby was alert and calm in her arms, those brown eyes taking in everything with what seemed like recognition rather than discovery. Sometimes the child would make a sound, and one of the animals would respond, as if they were having a conversation Lily couldn't quite understand but could feel in her heart. After what felt like hours, but could have been minutes, time seemed to move differently here. They arrived at a grove that took Lily's breath away. The trees formed a perfect circle, their branches intertwining overhead to create a natural cathedral. Sunlight filtered through in rays that looked solid enough to touch, and the snow on the ground was unmarked except for patterns that seemed deliberate, artistic, intentional. In the center of the grove was a flat stone, worn smooth by countless years, and around it were more bears. Not just one or two, but a whole family group. Cubs playing in the snow, adolescents wrestling gently. Adults sitting with a dignity that seemed almost human. The bear that had led them here walked to the center of the group and made a series of sounds that were clearly communication. The other bears responded, their voices creating a harmony that resonated through the grove. Then, one by one, they approached Lily and the baby. Each bear came close enough to smell the child, some of them touching the baby gently with their noses, all of them making sounds of what could only be described as welcome. The cubs were especially interested, standing on their hind legs to get a better look, their eyes bright with curiosity. The baby laughed, actually laughed, a sound of pure joy that made every creature in the grove seem to smile in their own way. An elderly bear, its fur silver with age, approached last. This bear moved with careful dignity, and the others parted to let it through with obvious respect. When it reached Lily, it sat down heavily in the snow and looked at her with eyes that held centuries of wisdom. It raised one paw slowly, carefully, and placed it on the ground in front of her. Somehow, Lily understood this was an invitation. She knelt down, still holding the baby, and placed her free hand on the bear's paw. The moment she made contact, the visions came again, but clearer this time, more coherent. She saw the history of this grove, stretching back generations. She saw bears and humans living in harmony, not as master and servant or even as separate species, but as family. She saw children born with the mark of both worlds, able to walk between the human and animal realms, serving as bridges, as translators, as peacekeepers. She saw that this had been the way for centuries until something had broken the connection. Fear, misunderstanding, the gradual forgetting of the old ways. But the bears had remembered. They had waited, keeping the grove sacred, watching for the signs that the time had come to restore what was lost. And the signs had led them to her cabin, to her, to this moment. The baby in her arms was one of these bridge children, she understood now. Not abandoned, but deliberately placed, not lost, but exactly where he needed to be. The fur wrapping hadn't been random. It was a gift from the bears, a sign of trust and adoption. And she, Lily, had been chosen not by chance, but because the forest had felt her grief, her loneliness, her need for family, and had decided to offer her something extraordinary. The child needed a human mother to teach him the human ways, just as he needed the bears to teach him the ways of the wild. And she needed both of them to heal her broken heart and show her that family could take forms she had never imagined. The vision faded, and the elderly bear withdrew its paw. It made a sound that seemed like approval, then turned to the flat stone in the center of the grove. The other bears gathered around, forming a circle, and began to make sounds that were definitely ceremonial. It was like singing, but deeper, older, coming from the earth itself. The baby in Lily's arms began to glow again, brighter this time, and she realized the markings on his skin were moving, shifting, forming new patterns that matched the shadows and light in the grove. She felt herself being drawn forward, not by any external force, but by a pull in her heart that told her this was right. This was meant to be. This was home. She walked to the stone and, following an instinct she didn't fully understand, placed the baby on its smooth surface. The child lay there, peacefully, glowing softly, while the bears' singing grew louder, more complex. The other animals joined in, each adding their voice to the harmony, the wolves howling melodically, the birds trilling, even the trees seeming to creak and sway in rhythm. Lily found herself humming along, the melody coming to her as naturally as breathing. She placed her hands on the stone beside the baby and felt the warmth of it, the life of it, as if the stone itself was part of some vast, living network that connected every living thing in the forest. The singing reached a crescendo, and the baby's glow became brilliant, filling the grove with golden light. Lily had to close her eyes against the brightness, but she could still feel everything: the presence of the bears, the consciousness of the forest, the pure joy radiating from the child. When the light finally faded and she could open her eyes again, she saw that the baby now had a mark on his forehead, a symbol that matched one of the patterns in the fur wrapping. It was beautiful, intricate, and somehow she knew it marked him as accepted, as belonging to both worlds. The bears stepped back, and the elderly bear approached again. This time it had something in its mouth, a small leather pouch on a cord. It dropped this gently beside the baby, and Lily understood it was meant for her. She picked it up and opened it carefully. Inside were seeds, unlike any she had ever seen, glowing faintly with their own inner light. The elderly bear made a sound and gestured with its head toward her cabin. These were for planting, she realized, for growing something that would connect her home to this grove, that would make her cabin part of the sacred network that bound the forest together. The baby made a happy gurgling sound and reached for her, and she scooped him up, feeling the warmth of his skin through the fur wrapping. The bears began to disperse, some heading deeper into the forest, others settling down in the grove as if to rest. But the mother bear that had first appeared at her cabin remained, approaching Lily with slow, deliberate steps. It sniffed the baby gently, then did something that made Lily's eyes fill with tears. It licked the child's forehead, right over the new mark, a gesture so tender and maternal that it transcended species. Then the bear looked at Lily and made a soft sound that she somehow understood meant sister. As if responding to the emotional moment, the baby's tiny hand reached out and grabbed a handful of Lily's hair, tugging gently. She looked down at him and saw that his eyes were drooping, the excitement of the morning finally catching up with him. The mother bear turned and began walking back the way they had come, clearly intending to escort them home. The journey back seemed shorter, or perhaps Lily was just lost in thought, processing everything that had happened. The baby slept peacefully in her arms, occasionally making small sounds that the bears would answer with gentle rumbles. When they finally emerged from the deep forest and her cabin came into view, Lily was surprised to see that the sun was already beginning to set. Had they really been gone all day? Time moved strangely in that grove, she realized. The mother bear stopped at the edge of the clearing, sitting down in the same spot where it had kept vigil the night before. Lily understood. The bear would be there, watching, protecting, being part of their strange new family. She carried the sleeping baby inside, laying him gently in a drawer she had emptied and lined with soft blankets, the best makeshift crib she could manage. As she prepared a simple dinner for herself, she kept glancing at the sleeping child, still hardly believing everything that had happened. The marks on his skin were barely visible now, just faint tracings that could be mistaken for unusual birthmarks. But she knew what they really were, proof of something magical, something that connected this child to forces older and deeper than most humans ever encountered. She thought about calling someone, telling someone, but who would believe her? And more importantly, she realized she didn't want to share this, not yet. This was sacred, private, a gift that needed to be protected and nurtured before the world could know about it. That night, as she sat by the fire with the baby, sleeping peacefully nearby, she heard the bears outside. Not just the mother bear, but others too, their voices creating a lullaby that seemed to wrap around the cabin like a protective blanket. She picked up the pouch of seeds the elderly bear had given her and examined them more closely. They seemed to pulse with life, and she could almost hear them whispering about spring, about growth, about connections that would strengthen and spread. Tomorrow, she would figure out where to plant them. Tomorrow, she would begin to build the bridge between her world and theirs. The baby stirred in his sleep, making a soft sound that was immediately answered by a rumble from outside. Lily smiled, realizing that this child would never feel alone, would never know the isolation she had felt. He would grow up with two families, two worlds, carrying the wisdom of both, and she would be there to guide him through the human side of his nature, while the bears would teach him things she could never fully understand, but could appreciate and respect. It was an arrangement that should have been impossible, but here in this remote corner of the wilderness, impossible things seemed to happen as naturally as snow falling from the sky. As the fire burned lower and her eyes grew heavy, Lily found herself thinking about the name she should give the baby. It needed to be something that honored both sides of his nature, something that would remind him of this magical beginning. She thought about the elderly bear's wise eyes, about the grove that had seemed to exist outside of time, about the way the forest itself had seemed to sing during the ceremony. And then it came to her, Jacob. It meant holder of the heel in ancient texts, but she had always loved how it sounded like the call of a jaybird, a creature that lived between the ground and the sky, just as this child would live between two worlds. Jacob, she whispered to the sleeping baby, and outside the bears made sounds of approval, as if they understood and accepted the name. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the mother bear still keeping watch. The massive creature looked back at her, and in its eyes she saw reflected the same fierce protective love she felt growing in her own heart. They were mothers together now, sharing the responsibility of raising this remarkable child. It should have been terrifying, but instead, it filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since Michael's death. The stars were beginning to appear in the clear winter sky, each one sharp and bright in the cold air. Lily remembered reading once that some indigenous peoples believed the stars were the campfires of their ancestors, watching over the living. Looking at them now, With a magical child sleeping in her cabin and bears keeping watch outside, she could believe it. She could believe that Michael was up there somewhere, smiling at this strange turn her life had taken, happy that she had found a reason to truly live again, not just exist. The baby made a small cry, the first real cry she had heard from him, and she hurried over to pick him up. He was hungry again, and she prepared another bottle with the ease of someone who had been doing it for years rather than hours. As she fed him, she told him about his name, about the grove, about the bears that would be his other family. She told him about the seeds they would plant in the spring, about the connections they would nurture, about the bridge he was destined to become. He watched her with those impossibly aware eyes, and she could have sworn he understood every word. When the bottle was empty and Jacob was settled against her shoulder, she walked back to the window. The mother bear had been joined by 2 cubs, probably her own from a previous year. They were playing in the snow, tumbling and wrestling while their mother watched with patient indulgence. It was such a normal family scene, except for the fact that it was happening in her front yard and seemed to include her and Jacob in its warm circle. One of the cubs looked up at the window and, seeing her there, stood on its hind legs and waved its paws in what looked remarkably like a greeting. Lily laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. She carried Jacob to the drawer crib and settled him in, then pulled a chair close so she could sit beside him. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a warm glow over everything. Outside, she could hear the bears settling in for the night, their presence a comfort rather than a threat. She reached into the crib and touched Jacob's tiny hand, marveling at how perfect it was, how something so small could have brought such massive change to her life in just one day. His fingers curled around hers in his sleep, holding on with surprising strength, and she felt tears sliding down her cheeks again, but they were tears of joy this time, of gratitude, of wonder. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she knew. She would need supplies for the baby, would need to figure out the legal complications of a child appearing on her doorstep, would need to learn how to be a mother to both a human child and something more. But tonight, in this moment, with the bears standing guard and the stars watching overhead, everything was perfect. She had been broken, had come to the forest to hide from the world, but instead, the forest had given her a gift beyond imagination. It had given her a family, strange and wonderful and absolutely real. As she dozed in the chair, her hand still holding Jacob's, she thought she heard music again, that same ethereal melody from the grove. But now it seemed to be coming from everywhere, from the trees, from the snow, from the very air around them. It was the sound of the world welcoming Jacob, celebrating his arrival, promising to protect and nurture him as he grew into whatever magnificent destiny awaited him. And at the center of it all was her cabin, no longer a hiding place but a nexus, a meeting point between worlds, a home for miracles. The mother bear outside made one last sound before settling into silence, a deep, contented rumble that vibrated through the walls. It was saying good night, Lily realized, to both her and Jacob. She whispered good night back, knowing somehow that the bear would hear and understand. Then she pulled a blanket over herself and let sleep take her. There, in the chair beside her impossible, wonderful new son, while the magic of the forest kept watch over them all. In her dreams that night, she saw glimpses of the future. She saw Jacob taking his first steps, one hand holding hers, the other resting on the mother bear's fur. She saw him learning to speak, his first words a mixture of human language and the deep rumbles of bear communication. She saw him running through the forest with the cubs, all of them growing together, playing together, learning from each other. She saw him as a young man, tall and strong, with those same deep brown eyes but now carrying the wisdom of both worlds, standing in the grove with bears and humans gathered around him, teaching others about the connections that bound all living things together. And she saw herself, older but vibrant, surrounded by a family she could never have imagined. Bears and humans, animals of all kinds, all of them united by love and understanding and the magic that Jacob had brought into their lives. When she woke in the morning, the sun was streaming through the windows, and Jacob was making soft, happy sounds in his makeshift crib. The mother bear was still outside, now joined by even more animals. She could see deer grazing peacefully near the porch. Birds perched on every available surface, even a fox curled up in a sunny spot. They had all come to be near Jacob, to be part of this new chapter in the ancient story of the forest. She picked up the baby, who immediately reached for the window, wanting to see his extended family. As she held him up to look outside, all the animals turned toward them, and she could have sworn they were smiling in their own unique ways. "Good morning, Little Bridge," she whispered to Jacob, using the nickname that had come to her in her dreams. "Ready for another magical day?" The baby gurgled happily and patted her cheek with one tiny hand. And outside, the mother bear stood up and stretched, ready to face whatever wonders the new day would bring. Lily realized that she had no idea what would happen next, how this strange situation would evolve, what challenges they would face. But for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. She had found her purpose, her family, her home in the most unexpected way possible. She carried Jacob to the kitchen and began preparing his morning bottle, humming the melody from the grove as she worked. The baby watched everything with those ancient eyes, occasionally making sounds that were answered by the animals outside. It was like living in a fairy tale, except it was better because it was real. The weight of the seed pouch in her pocket reminded her of the planting she needed to do, of the connections that still needed to be made. But there was time for all of that. Right now, in this moment, she was exactly where she needed to be, in a cabin in the wilderness, feeding a magical child while bears kept watch and the forest itself seemed to sing with joy. As she settled into the rocking chair to feed Jacob, she noticed something new. The markings on his skin were changing, forming different patterns that seemed to respond to the morning light. They were beautiful, mesmerizing, and somehow she understood that they were a language of sorts, a way for Jacob to communicate with the natural world around him. She traced one gently with her finger, and the baby smiled around the bottle, his eyes crinkling with what looked like joy. Outside, the mother bear made a sound that was definitely laughter, deep and rumbling and full of warmth. This was her life now, Lily thought as she rocked slowly back and forth. Not the life she had planned or expected, but something infinitely more wonderful. She had come to the forest to escape, to grieve, to slowly fade away from the world. Instead, she had been chosen for something extraordinary. She was the human mother to a bridge child, a member of an impossible family that included bears and the forest itself. It should have been overwhelming, but instead, it felt like coming home after a very long journey. The baby finished his bottle and snuggled against her chest, making soft, contented sounds. Outside, the animals continued their peaceful watch, and the sun climbed higher in the clear winter sky. She stood up and walked to the door, Jacob secure in her arms. It was time for their morning greeting, a ritual that had already begun to feel essential. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch, the cold air fresh and invigorating. The mother bear approached slowly, and Lily knelt down so Jacob could reach out and touch the bear's nose, their daily moment of connection between worlds. The baby laughed, that pure, joyful sound that made everything else fade away. The bear made its own sound of happiness, and for a moment, the three of them existed in perfect harmony: human mother, bear mother, and the magical child who bound them together. As she stood back up, Lily noticed more bears emerging from the forest, the same family group from the grove. They arranged themselves in a loose circle around the cabin, not threatening, but protective, creating a living barrier between Jacob and any danger that might exist in the world beyond. The elderly bear was among them, its wise eyes finding hers across the distance. It nodded slowly, a gesture so human it took her breath away, and she understood. This wasn't just about Jacob. This was about rebuilding something that had been lost, about proving that the old connections between humans and nature could be restored. And it would start here, with them, with this impossible family and the love that bound them together. The sun was fully up now, painting the snow-covered world in brilliant light. Jacob reached out toward the bears, making excited sounds, and they responded with their own calls of greeting and affection. Lily felt the seeds in her pocket growing warm, eager to be planted, to begin their work of connection and growth. Spring would come, she knew, and with it, new challenges and wonders. But for now, in this perfect winter moment, she held her magical child and watched as two worlds that had been separated for too long began to weave themselves back together, one small miracle at a time. By afternoon, Lily had developed a routine that felt both new and ancient. She would feed Jacob, then carry him outside where the bears would take turns approaching, each one greeting the child with gentle touches and rumbling sounds that seemed to be blessings. The baby never feared them, reaching out with eager hands to touch fur and noses, laughing when the cubs performed their playful antics. She had set up a comfortable chair on the porch where she could sit with Jacob while maintaining connection with both worlds, the warm cabin behind her and the magical forest community spread out before her. It was during one of these afternoon sessions that something extraordinary happened. Jacob, who by all appearances couldn't be more than a few months old, suddenly pointed at the elderly bear and made a sound that was unmistakably intentional. It wasn't quite a word, but it wasn't baby babble either. The elderly bear's eyes widened, and it made a similar sound back. They went back and forth several times, clearly communicating, while Lily watched in amazement. Then the elderly bear stood up and walked to a specific tree at the edge of the clearing. It placed its paw on the trunk and looked back at Jacob expectantly. The baby made another sound. Different this time, and incredibly the tree began to change. Its bare winter branches suddenly sprouted tiny green buds, just a few, but enough to be noticeable against the snow. The bears all made sounds of approval and excitement, and Lily felt her heart racing. This child, this remarkable being she had been given to raise, could speak to nature itself. He could wake sleeping trees, could bridge not just communities but seasons themselves. She held him closer, overwhelmed by the responsibility and the wonder of it all. As the sun began to set on their second day together, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Lily prepared for the evening ritual that was already becoming sacred to her. She would tell Jacob stories while the bears listened from outside, their presence a constant comfort. Tonight, she told him about the seeds in her pocket, about the garden they would plant come spring, about how the plants that grew from those seeds would be unlike anything the world had seen for generations. The baby listened with those ancient eyes, occasionally reaching up to touch her face, as if to say he understood, he approved, he was happy. Then chapters of mentioned part has completed. The weeks that followed were a blur of discovery and wonder. Jacob grew faster than any normal child should, not physically but in awareness and ability. By the end of the first month, He could sit up on his own, his movements coordinated and deliberate. The marks on his skin had become more complex, telling stories that Lily was only beginning to understand. Sometimes, when the light hit them just right, she could see images in the patterns, bears walking upright like humans, humans running on all fours like bears, and always, at the center, a child who belonged to both worlds. The mother bear had become a constant presence, often sleeping just outside the cabin door. Her cubs, who Lily had learned were named through a combination of sounds and gestures that she was slowly beginning to understand, treated Jacob like a younger sibling. They would bring him things, interesting rocks, perfect pine cones, once even a butterfly that had somehow survived the winter, landing gently on Jacob's outstretched hand before flying away. Each gift was received with the same joy and reverence, and Lily carefully saved them all in a special box, knowing they would be important to Jacob when he was older. One morning, Lily woke to find the cabin surrounded by more animals than ever before. Not just the usual bears and deer, but creatures she rarely saw, a mountain lion sitting peacefully beside a family of rabbits, an eagle perched on her roof, even what looked like a wolf pack arranged in formation at the forest's edge. They were all perfectly still, all facing the cabin, and Lily knew something significant was about to happen. She picked up Jacob, who was already awake and alert, his marks glowing faintly in the dawn light. As she opened the door, all the animals bowed their heads simultaneously, a gesture of respect that made her knees weak. The elderly bear approached, and behind it walked something that made Lily gasp. It was another human, an old woman with long silver hair and clothes that seemed to be made from the forest itself, woven bark and leaves and fur, all combined into something both practical and beautiful. The woman's eyes were the same deep brown as Jacob's, and she had similar marks on her skin, faded with age but still visible. "I am Sarah," the woman said, her voice carrying the same ancient quality that Lily heard in the bear's communication. "I am the last of the old bridge children, and I have come to teach you both." She approached slowly, her movements graceful despite her apparent age, and when she reached them she placed a weathered hand on Jacob's forehead. The baby's marks flared bright gold, and he made a sound of pure joy. "He is stronger than any who have come before," Sarah said, looking at Lily with eyes that held centuries of knowledge. "And you, dear one, you are the first new human mother in over 50 years. The forest chose well." Sarah stayed with them for 3 days and 3 nights, teaching Lily the old ways. She showed her how to read the marks on Jacob's skin, how to understand the subtle communications between the child and the natural world, how to prepare the special foods that would help him grow into his abilities. She taught her songs in a language that predated any Lily had heard, songs that could calm storms or call animals or help plants grow, and most importantly, she taught her about the prophecy that had foretold Jacob's coming. "Every 100 years, Sarah explained as they sat by the fire on her last night, Jacob sleeping peacefully between them, "a child is born who can fully bridge our worlds. But for the bridge to hold, they need both human and animal families, need to be raised with love from both sides." The last few times, fear and misunderstanding prevented the connection from forming properly. Children were taken from their animal families, or rejected by their human ones. The bridge weakened, and our worlds drifted apart. But Jacob is different. He has you, who accepted him without question, and he has the bears, who have waited so patiently for his arrival. He will be the one to restore what was lost. Before she left, Sarah gave Lily a gift, a journal filled with drawings and notes from bridge children throughout history. The pages were old, some of them crumbling at the edges, but the information was invaluable. There were recipes for medicines that combined human herbalism with animal knowledge, instructions for ceremonies that would strengthen Jacob's connection to both worlds, and stories of other bridge children and what they had accomplished. Some had become healers, able to cure diseases that baffled human doctors by understanding the wisdom of animal immunity. Others had become peacekeepers, preventing conflicts between human settlements and animal territories. All of them had been special. But according to Sarah, none had been as powerful as Jacob promised to be. "The marks tell the story," Sarah said, tracing one of the patterns on Jacob's sleeping form. "See here? This is the sign of the Great Gathering, when all species will come together in harmony. And here, this spiral? That represents the healing of the earth itself. He's not just a bridge between humans and animals, Lily. He's a bridge between the earth and something greater, something we've forgotten how to see. Guard him well, teach him compassion and wisdom, and when the time comes he will teach the world things we desperately need to remember." After Sarah left, disappearing into the forest as mysteriously as she had arrived, life settled into a new rhythm. Lily began incorporating the lessons from the journal into their daily routine. She would sing the old songs while feeding Jacob, watching as his marks responded to different melodies. She prepared the special foods, mixing ordinary ingredients with the herbs and roots the bears brought her, creating meals that seemed to make Jacob glow with health and vitality. And every evening, she would read to him from the journal, stories of bridge children from centuries past, their adventures and challenges and triumphs. The bears, for their part, began teaching Jacob their ways. Even though he was still physically an infant, they would carry him, gently, so gently, on their backs through the forest, showing him the secret paths and hidden places. They taught him their language through sounds and gestures, and Lily was amazed to see him responding, his tiny hands mimicking their movements, his voice attempting their rumbling calls. The mother bear was especially patient, spending hours simply sitting with Jacob, their foreheads touching, sharing something that Lily couldn't fully understand but could feel in the air around them, a transfer of knowledge, of memory, of belonging. Spring arrived early that year, the snow melting with unusual speed. Lily knew it was time to plant the seeds the elderly bear had given her. She carried Jacob outside, where the bears had already gathered in a circle around a patch of earth they had cleared near the cabin. The ground was dark and rich, and when Lily knelt down with the seed pouch, she could feel warmth emanating from the soil itself. Jacob reached for the seeds, and she let him hold one. It immediately began to glow brighter, pulsing with life, and when he dropped it onto the ground, it sank in immediately, as if the earth was eager to receive it. They planted all the seeds together, Lily and Jacob and the bears, each one placed with ceremony and intention. As the last seed entered the ground, something remarkable happened. Green shoots emerged immediately, growing with impossible speed, but also with perfect control. Within minutes, there were saplings where seeds had been, and the saplings were unlike any trees Lily had ever seen. Their bark shimmered with the same patterns that marked Jacob's skin, and their leaves, when they unfurled, were every shade of green imaginable, some even edged with gold. The trees grew to full height within an hour, forming a grove that connected Lily's cabin to the greater forest. But more than that, they created a network, their roots intertwining underground, their branches touching overhead, forming a living web that Lily could actually feel humming with energy. When she placed her hand on one of the trunks, she could sense the entire forest, every animal, every plant, every stone and stream. And at the center of it all was Jacob, his presence like a bright star in the network, connecting everything, harmonizing everything, bridging worlds that had been separate for far too long. As spring turned to summer, word began to spread through the animal kingdom about the bridge child. Creatures came from miles around to see Jacob, to receive his blessing, to be part of the restoration that was beginning. The cabin became a pilgrimage site of sorts, though only for the animals. No humans came, and Lily was grateful for that. Jacob wasn't ready for the human world yet, and frankly, the human world wasn't ready for him. But she knew that day would come, and she tried to prepare both herself and Jacob for it. She began teaching him human things alongside the forest wisdom. Even though he was still so young, he absorbed everything with that uncanny awareness. She would read him books, show him pictures of cities and cars, and all the things that existed beyond the forest. The bears would watch these lessons with patient interest, understanding that Jacob needed to know both worlds to bridge them. Sometimes the mother bear would make sounds of concern when Lily showed Jacob images of pollution or deforestation, and Lily would have to explain as best she could why humans did such things, how they had forgotten their connection to the earth. Jacob's response to these lessons was always the same. He would place his tiny hand on Lily's heart, then on the mother bear's chest, then on his own, as if to say that the connection still existed, it just needed to be remembered. His marks would glow softly, and Lily would feel a wave of hope wash over her. This child, this impossible, magical child, really could change things. Not through force or fear, but through reminding both humans and animals that they were never meant to be separate, that they were all part of the same living world. One night, as summer reached its peak, Lily was awakened by a sound she had never heard before. It was music, but not like any music from human or animal. It seemed to come from the trees themselves, from the grove that had grown from the magical seeds. She picked up Jacob, who was already awake and reaching toward the door, and stepped outside. The sight that greeted her took her breath away. The trees were glowing, their bark patterns shifting and swirling like living art. The bears were arranged in a circle around the grove, their heads raised to the sky, adding their voices to the strange, beautiful symphony. And in the center of it all, floating a few inches off the ground, was Jacob. He had never done anything like this before, and Lily's first instinct was panic. But the mother bear made a calming sound, and Sarah's words came back to her. He's a bridge between the earth and something greater. This was part of his nature, part of his purpose. She watched in awe as Jacob's marks flowed like liquid light across his skin, extending beyond his body to connect with the patterns on the trees. For a moment, she could see it all, the entire web of life, not just in the forest but across the world, all of it connected, all of it singing the same ancient song. When Jacob finally settled back to the ground, the music fading to a whisper, he crawled to Lily and curled up in her arms, exhausted but peaceful. The bears approached one by one, each touching him gently, reverently. The elderly bear came last, and when it looked at Lily, she saw tears in its ancient eyes. It made a series of sounds that she understood meant, "He is ready. The world is ready. The bridge is strong." But ready for what? Lily wondered as she carried Jacob back inside. What was coming that would require the bridge to be activated now? She got her answer a few weeks later when she ventured into town for supplies, leaving Jacob with the bears for the first time. The news was full of environmental disasters. Forests burning, species going extinct, conflicts between human development and wildlife reaching critical points. The world was indeed approaching a crisis, a point where the separation between humanity and nature might become irreversible. But now there was Jacob, and others like him perhaps, waiting to emerge, waiting to remind humanity of what it had forgotten. When she returned to the cabin, she found Jacob sitting up on his own in the middle of the bear family, his hands moving in complex patterns as he spoke with them. The mother bear was responding, teaching him something that looked like a dance but felt like something much more profound. They were preparing him, Lily realized, for his role in whatever was coming. She joined them, sitting in the circle, and Jacob immediately crawled to her, his face bright with joy. He was growing so fast, learning so much, but he was still her baby, still the child who had appeared on her doorstep in a wrapping of fur and changed her life forever. As autumn approached, the forest began to transform. The leaves on the magical trees turned colors Lily had never seen before, purples and silvers and golds that seemed to glow from within. Jacob, now able to walk with help, would toddle between the trees, his hands touching each trunk, his marks reflecting the colors of the leaves. The bears prepared for hibernation, but the mother bear made it clear she would not be sleeping this year. She would stay awake to continue Jacob's education, to be there as he grew into his power. One day, as Lily was teaching Jacob to stack blocks, a normal baby activity that seemed almost absurd given everything else he could do, there was a knock at the door. Not an animal scratching, but a human knock. Lily's heart raced as she picked up Jacob and approached the door cautiously. Through the window, she could see a young woman, maybe 25, with a backpack and hiking boots. But what made Lily open the door was what she saw on the woman's neck. Marks, faint but unmistakable, similar to Jacob's. "My name is Emma," the woman said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've been having dreams, visions. They led me here. I think I'm supposed to help somehow." As she spoke, Jacob's marks began to glow, and Emma's responded, growing brighter. The bears, who had been ready to defend against an intruder, relaxed and made sounds of welcome. Another bridge, Lily realized. Not as powerful as Jacob, but still connected, still part of the network that was slowly, carefully being rebuilt. Emma stayed with them, becoming part of their strange family. She had grown up thinking she was crazy, seeing connections and patterns that others couldn't, hearing the voices of animals and plants. But here, in this magical place, she was normal. She was home. She helped Lily care for Jacob, and in return, Jacob helped her understand her own gifts. Together, they were stronger, the bridge more stable. And Lily began to hope that there were others out there, waiting to be found, waiting to remember their connection to the wild world. Winter came again, completing the cycle, and Jacob celebrated what Lily decided was his first birthday, though who knew how time really worked for a bridge child. The bears brought gifts, honey from a hive they protected, crystals from a deep cave, flowers that somehow bloomed despite the snow. Emma sang songs she had learned in her dreams, and the magical trees hummed along. And Jacob, walking confidently now, moved between all of them, his presence binding them together into something new and ancient at the same time. That night, as snow began to fall in the same strange, spiraling patterns that had marked Jacob's arrival, Lily stood at the window where it had all begun. But now, instead of loneliness and grief, she felt complete. She had a son who was miraculous, a friend who understood the magic, and a family that included some of the most magnificent creatures on Earth. The bridge was built, growing stronger every day, and through it, healing was flowing in both directions. Jacob toddled up to her, reaching up to be held. She lifted him, and together they watched the snow fall, watched the bears playing in the moonlight, watched the magical trees swaying in a wind that touched nothing else. "Thank you," she whispered, not to Jacob, but to the forest, to the universe, to whatever force had decided she was worthy of this gift. Jacob patted her cheek and then pointed outside, where the mother bear was standing, looking up at them. Even from a distance, Lily could see the love in the bear's eyes. the same love she felt for this impossible child who belonged to all of them. "Mama," Jacob said suddenly, his first clear human word. But he was looking at both Lily and the bear when he said it, and Lily understood. He had two mothers, two families, two worlds that he would spend his life bringing together. She kissed his forehead, right on the mark that proclaimed him as chosen, as special, as the bridge the world desperately needed. Outside, the bears began their nightly lullaby, and inside, surrounded by warmth and love and magic, Lily sang along, her voice joining the ancient song that had been waiting so long to be sung again. As the seasons turned and Jacob grew, more bridge children began to emerge, drawn by the signal that emanated from the magical grove. Some were infants like Jacob had been, delivered mysteriously to humans who had the capacity to love beyond the boundaries of species. Others were older children who had always felt different, who had hidden their abilities out of fear. Emma helped find them, her own gifts growing stronger with practice and proximity to Jacob. Together, they created a sanctuary, a school of sorts, where bridge children could learn to navigate both worlds. The bears and other animals served as teachers alongside Lily and Emma. The children learned practical skills, how to track, how to find food in the forest, how to read weather patterns. But they also learned deeper truths, how to hear the earth's heartbeat, how to feel the connections between all living things, how to heal rifts that seemed impossible to bridge. Jacob, despite being one of the youngest, was clearly their leader, his power and understanding growing exponentially with each passing day. By the time Jacob was walking and talking fluently, which happened far sooner than it should have, news of the sanctuary had spread through whispered stories and half-believed rumors. Scientists came, skeptics who left as believers. Environmental activists arrived, searching for hope in a world that seemed to be dying, and found it in the children who could speak to both humanity and nature. Even government officials appeared, cautious and concerned, but left understanding that something profound was happening, something that couldn't be stopped or controlled, only supported or opposed. Lily watched it all with a mixture of pride and protectiveness. Her quiet life in the cabin had become the center of something worldwide, but she never forgot that first night, when it was just her and a baby wrapped in fur and the silent falling snow. Jacob never forgot either. No matter how many people came to learn from him, no matter how his responsibilities grew, he always returned to Lily and the mother bear, his two mothers, the ones who had loved him first and would love him always. The prophecy Sarah had spoken of was coming true, but not in the dramatic, sudden way Lily had expected. It was happening slowly, gently, like spring arriving after a long winter. Each bridge child who learned to use their gifts created ripples that spread outward. A girl in Japan who could calm typhoons by singing to them. A boy in Africa who helped elephants and humans share water during droughts. Twins in South America who could accelerate the regrowth of burned rainforests. And at the center of it all was Jacob, coordinating, teaching, bridging not just species but continents. One day, when Jacob was 5 years old by human counting but ancient in wisdom, he took Lily and the mother bear to the sacred grove where he had first been recognized by the bears. The grove had grown, spreading outward, its influence visible in the health and vitality of the surrounding forest. In the center, on the same stone where Jacob had once laid as an infant, something new was growing, a tree unlike any of the others, its trunk twisted into a double helix, its leaves shifting through every color of the spectrum. "This is for you," Jacob said, his child's voice carrying the weight of ages. "Both of you. You believed when no one else would have. You loved when love seemed impossible. you built the first bridge, and all the others rest on that foundation." He placed one small hand on Lily's arm and the other on the bear's massive paw. Where he touched them, marks appeared, not as elaborate as his own, but clear and permanent, marking them as the mothers of the bridge, the ones who had made it all possible. The bear made a sound that was definitely crying, and Lily felt tears streaming down her own face. They sat together in the grove, the three of them. As the sun set and the stars emerged, the tree Jacob had shown them began to glow softly, and in its light, Lily could see the future. A world where humans and animals lived in harmony again, where the wisdom of the wild was respected and preserved, where children like Jacob were not anomalies but guides, helping humanity remember its place in the web of life. It wouldn't be easy. There would be those who feared the change, who fought against it. There would be setbacks and struggles and moments of doubt, but the bridge had been built, and it was strong, strengthened by love and trust and the unshakable bond between a human woman, a mother bear, and the remarkable child they raised together. As they sat in the grove, other animals began to arrive, and then humans too, the other bridge children and their families, creating a circle of connection that pulsed with life and hope. Jacob stood in the center, his marks glowing brighter than ever, and began to sing in the old language Sarah had taught them. One by one, others joined in, human and animal voices blending into a harmony that hadn't been heard for generations. The magical trees responded, their own music joining the chorus, and for a moment, just a moment, the entire world seemed to pause and listen. In that moment, Lily felt it, the healing beginning, the remembering starting, the bridge not just built, but finally, truly, being crossed. The song ended, but its echo continued, spreading outward like ripples on a pond, carrying the message to every corner of the earth. The separation is ending. The connection is returning. The bridge children are here. Jacob walked back to Lily and the mother bear, taking both their hands' paws in his small ones. "It's beginning," he said simply, and they understood. Not ending, but beginning. The real work, the real magic, the real transformation was just starting. As they walked home through the forest, the three of them together as they had been from the start, Lily marveled at how much had changed since that snowy night. She had thought she was saving an abandoned baby, but really, he had saved her. She had thought she was teaching him about the human world, but he had taught her about a world so much larger and more connected than she had ever imagined. And the mother bear, patient and wise, had taught them both about a love that transcended species, about family that went beyond blood, about trust that could bridge any gap. The cabin came into view, smoke still rising from the chimney, looking exactly as it had that first night. But now it was surrounded by the magical grove, connected to the forest network, serving as the heart of something miraculous. Emma was on the porch with several of the bridge children, teaching them to weave baskets from willow branches, while a family of raccoons demonstrated their own technique. It was a scene that should have been impossible, but here it was, real and beautiful and perfectly natural. "Home," Jacob said, and both Lily and the mother bear made sounds of agreement. This was home. Not just the cabin, but all of it. The forest, the animals, the growing community of bridge children, the expanding network of connection and healing. It was home, in the deepest sense. The place where all of them belonged, where the impossible became possible, where love conquered fear and unity replaced separation. That night, as Lily tucked Jacob into his bed, a proper bed now, not a drawer, though he often preferred to sleep outside with the bears, he looked up at her with those ancient eyes and asked, "Are you happy, Mama Lily?" She thought about the question, about her life before and after, about loss and discovery, about the journey that had brought them all to this moment. "Yes," she said, kissing his forehead on the mark that had started it all. "Happier than I ever thought possible." Outside, the mother bear rumbled her good night, and Jacob responded in kind. The magical trees hummed their lullaby, and the bridge children in their various beds throughout the expanded sanctuary settled into sleep. But Lily stayed awake a while longer, sitting by Jacob's bed, watching him sleep, marveling at the miracle of him. Somewhere out there, more children were being born with the gift, more connections were being made, more bridges were being built. The world was changing, slowly but surely, returning to a balance that had been lost for so long. She thought about Sarah's words, about the prophecy, about Jacob being the strongest bridge child in generations. But watching him sleep, his small hand curled around a wooden bear the mother bear's cubs had helped him carve, she saw him for what he really was. A child who needed love and guidance, who happened to have an extraordinary gift, who was doing his best to fulfill a destiny he hadn't chosen but had embraced. And she was his mother, one of two, chosen not by blood but by something deeper, stronger, more permanent. The marks on her arm, the ones Jacob had given her, glowed faintly in the darkness. She was marked now, part of the bridge herself, forever connected to both worlds. It was a responsibility she hadn't asked for but wouldn't trade for anything. She had come to the forest broken and alone, and the forest had given her purpose, family, and a love that transcended everything she had thought she knew about the world. As she finally drifted off to sleep in the chair beside Jacob's bed, she heard the music again, the song of the connected world, the harmony of all living things, the sound of bridges being built and crossed and strengthened. And at the center of it all was the steady heartbeat of three souls who had found each other in the most unlikely way: a grieving woman, a protective bear, and a magical child who belonged to both and brought them together into something new and wonderful, and absolutely, impossibly, beautifully real. The years that followed were filled with growth and change, challenges and triumphs. Jacob grew into his power, becoming a teacher and guide not just for the bridge children, but for anyone ready to remember their connection to the natural world. Lily aged gracefully, her hair turning silver, her face lined with years of laughter and outdoor living, but her spirit remained young, nurtured by the magic that surrounded her. The mother bear grew older too, her muzzle graying, her movements slower, but her love for Jacob never diminished. And through it all, the bridge held strong, built on the foundation of that first snowy night when fate brought together three souls who needed each other. The prophecy had come true, but not in ending, in beginning. The bridge would continue to grow, to strengthen, to spread, as long as there were those willing to believe in the impossible, to love beyond boundaries, to remember that all life was connected. And in a cabin in the woods, surrounded by magical trees and watchful bears, the story continued one day at a time, one connection at a time, one miracle at a time.